exist. As the proverb says, tomorrow never comes. There is no such thing as tomorrow. There never will be, because time is always now.
Welcome to the Philosophical Minds Podcast, the podcast about the stuff we wonder about.
And other things.
How would you define what is the Philosopher's Stone?
The stone, you can say that, some people say it's just an allegory for spiritual development. Some people say, right? Some people say it's actually a substance, right, that can transmute gold, lead into gold, right? But there's so many different stories, so many different legends, and all this kind of stuff happening. But when you dive into the alchemical theory, you see, from my perspective at least, you see that things actually make quite good sense, after a while. After a certain point, it makes good sense, right? But it is a very kind of winding road of, all these kind of, coded language and all this kind of stuff going on. And then you think that maybe I'm just stupid doing this, whatever, right? But the Philosopher's Stone in legend, right, or in myth and so on, is this magical thing that can transmute lead into gold, right? Which, could be true. I cannot say from first-hand experience that I've, ever transmuted lead into gold. But I think that there is some truth into it, right? But that doesn't mean that lead into gold is actually the thing that is the most important. That's just actually the material thing that we think is the most important. Oh, you want to make gold? I think that there's a much more spiritual aspect to it as well, right? It's like, in one sense, okay, you want to transmute lead into gold. Okay, maybe you want to transmute yourself from being from lead of low vibration into a high vibration to being gold, right? Which is inner transmutation, inner alchemy in one sense. But I think that all these things actually go together. So if you do your inner alchemy, you can do outer alchemy. If you do outer alchemy, you can do inner alchemy. It actually goes in together, like the famous axiom of as above, so below, so below, as above, as within, as without, and so on. So it's basically just a reflection, right? So if, somebody, would be able to transmute themselves, right, from lead into gold per se, then they would be able to make the stone, in the lab, and be able to create lead into gold. That would be possible if they would do it inside of themselves. But, it's like, you have these, stories about the puffers, right? The puffers who was basically doing it in old alchemical texts, right? They tried to make lead into gold, and they were just puffing away and doing these things, right? And they never succeeded. And there might be a reason for that, right? Maybe they were not initiated into a secret society which had the knowledge. Maybe they just, were making it the wrong way. Or maybe they were not ready to receive that knowledge because they did not do their inner work at the same time, right? So there's many different aspects of it, But I think that, the Philosopher's Stone could be many things in one way, but it depends who you ask, in one sense. It depends on and what books you read. But there is many references to actually being a substance that, will transmute, right? Which is in one sense that, transmutation has actually been proven, that they have actually made lead into gold by a certain kind of nuclear kind of fission thing, but that would, have require massive amounts of energy to do that, right? But if you would have a substance in the old alchemical text, then there would be cold transmutation. It would be just instantly transmutation. So. Yeah, I think it's it's a very interesting topic. I definitely have my point of view of it, right, and my research. But I think there's still a long way to go. But I do, at the moment I'm exploring a lot of the metallic realm in one sense, to make metallic oils. So for example, like if you look at Avery Hopkins, he's making a lot of metallic oils. One way of where you see that everything has a soul, mind, body. You can make a catalytic conversion reaction and get out the soul of the metal. You get out the oil of the metal, right? Which is actually also very fascinating and which works, and you can do it, right? It's very, it's very tangible, I would say.
We had discussed this before the podcast because we were talking about what is the Philosopher's Stone and what does it mean? And, sometimes I tend to have a more scientific approach at first, and then I kind of turn to nature to help understand the scientific approach of things. And so, I was telling Skylar that in the chemical world, the process, they take neutrons and they create so much energy that these neutrons collide into the protons, and then 3 protons are removed and it becomes gold. So it just changes the chemical balance. And, for me, there's a very natural explanation for things that happen. I think that if you look at nature, you can see a lot of things in the scientific world that come from that. And they're explained through nature. If you watch the way that, perhaps animals interact with plants and different processes that happen, like, for watching mushrooms and the networks they create and the way they communicate. So it's interesting to hear your take on it because, that between the two of us, we couldn't agree on what we thought it meant. So
exactly, and it's like, I think that, in one sense it is like when you do alchemy, right? First you start off in the plant realm, right? So you start with plants and herbs and so on, because that's the easiest way. You won't kill yourself doing plants if you don't do it really. If you're not really stupid, you cannot really kill yourself doing plant spagyric. It's not so hard. But then you get proficient and these operations of doing lab work and all this kind of stuff and spagyrics and so on. Then you can move up in the mineral, you can move up to the metallic world, and you might want to do it in the animal world. It's the different kingdoms of alchemy that you can do, right? But in a sense, right, it's like this. Imagine like this. Imagine if turning lead into gold is a metaphor. Just, like this. So they say lead is basically an unpure form of gold. Lead actually wants to be gold in one sense, right? So if you look at everything evolving, lead wants to evolve into gold because gold is a higher form. Lead can be corrupted quite easily, right? Gold cannot. Right. So if you see that way, it's like the alchemist, in one sense, he starts off his journey of alchemy to doing plant medicines, right? And then he creates these plant medicines, in the old days for himself, and maybe also to help other people if he wants to, but mainly for himself. So what does he do, right? He wants to purify himself, right? So the alchemist, he or her, whatever, wants to purify himself, herself, and become more noble, not as corruptible, easily corruptible, right? And then path from, being from lead to gold, so to say. And then you might move up, and then you have these insights, and you purify yourself, you detox yourself, you purify yourself, and then you have these insights coming to you. And the insights can be from the ether or from your higher self or whatever, right? And then you get more, pieces of the puzzle, and then more and more, and then you evolve yourself, and then the more you evolve yourself, then more your work evolves, right? And then you can take on more higher stuff. You can do the mineral work, you can do the metal work, and then the more you do it, the more you see that there's something else that you can do. And then on the path you might run into the Philosopher's Stone on this path. But the Philosopher's Stone is only one thing you can do in alchemy. There's so many things you can do. So the Philosopher's Stone is basically just a badge of honor. Here, it's a badge of honor. You've done it. You purified yourself. You've done the Philosopher's Stone. There you go. Now what? Okay, next step. What is that? Maybe there's something much greater than the Philosopher's Stone, right? That you can't even imagine until you've made the Philosopher's Stone and seen it for yourself.
Right, because it always, I think, retrospectively, as you discover things in life, something that you maybe learned 10 years ago, you'll come across it down the road and in a different way. And then maybe 10 years ago, you had no idea, what this thing was, or, you heard it and you remember hearing the words, but it had no meaning. And then 10 years later, all of a sudden, this thing that meant nothing, now it has meaning, and you understand in a very different way, even though you have this for 10 years, but these experiences, they change the way that things, mean something to you. So yeah, that makes sense.
Exactly. So you have to do the work, right? The great work is actually doing the work, all the way through, right? It's like, you cannot just, it's like if you go to law school, right? You can just not take the the final exam on the first day. You have to go through the law school, right? Through these 4, 5, 6, 7 years, right? Then you have to practice law, and then you have to become, take the all these tests and whatever, and then you can become a lawyer, right? After all these processes, right? But then you have the knowledge, then you can practice law, right? It's the same thing. There's no difference, right? You have to do the work. If you want to do the Philosopher's Stone, quote unquote, you have to do the work. And then it will basically present itself to you, right? If you do it in the right way, right? And that's also a personal journey.
Yeah, and I think all of life is that way. If you just kind of limit yourself to one area, like for instance, if I just got to law school and this was what I did, I practiced law, which many people are happy doing that, then I would have one perspective. But what I like to do, and I don't know if Sky talked about this, we actually bought 38 acres of land, and we had a well put in, and I have goats and I have ducks, and we are growing our own plants, and then Sky is getting more into plants and the alchemy side of things, because for us it's a learning process. Everything that I learn from doing these things and working the earth and planting plants, and sometimes they die and you're going, okay, what did I do wrong? Was it the time I planted it? Was it the amount of water? But there's also this interplay between the livestock that we have. We let them graze in certain areas, and then we move them to other areas, and they fertilize the soil, and they do all these different things. You can read about these, but if you don't experiment and see and try different things, you never learn for yourself. And that knowledge has transferred into my practice of law in a very practical way, because the way that my brain takes things in, I'm constantly seeing how things play together, and human behavior, for when I go to court and I have a jury sitting there, I have to look at the jury and I have to understand what they're thinking, what the purpose of what's going on is, because I'm not just litigating a case for me. For me, I'm changing someone's life. It's my chance to help someone, or I can use it for bad. And you see that happen. So I think that, alchemy is so interesting because it encompasses really all aspects of life. And I think that you can learn so much more if you look at life in that way, instead of just kind of compartmentalizing it, and studying just one small area and thinking, this is it.
Exactly. It's like, and also if you look at alchemy is saying that, everything is alive, right? Everything is, it's an interplay between all these things in the universe going on, and everything's interconnected, everything's alive, right? And that doesn't mean it's like, this, you can, put this into perspective, as you said, into law, into your life in so many different ways, right? But it's all also, think of this, it's all driven by consciousness. So consciousness is the, not necessarily in the missing key, but if you look at our society, in one way, we are led to believe that everything is just black and white, on and off, ones and zeros, it's dead, there's no God, it's like, and so on, unless you're a Christian, But everything is basically just, in alchemy, say, look, everything is consciousness. Consciousness is driving everything that there is, right? And if everything is connected, everything is consciousness, then you can see alchemy everywhere. It's just there, And if you understand, the basics of alchemy, you can see it basically everywhere, You can just break it down, and then you can see how consciousness relates to matter, right? That's what it basically is. It's like, if you have, in one sense, if you go a little bit more, say that you can touch a little bit more on the esoteric kind of knowledge, in one sense. And if you look at it, you say that, okay, consciousness, say that, you first have the soul, right? The soul is the actuating cause of everything, right? And then you have the mind, right? Which basically can think. So the soul has an inherent quality of, the mind, and then starts to structure itself, and then reality is born, right? So our reality is basically inside our mind, which is inside our soul. Basically, if you see the alchemical way, right? But it's just, it's very interesting because you can break it down, you can see it, and you can apply it to so many different things, right? In your life, right? If you can just see the patterns, because everything is just a pattern. It's like, it's like this fractal universe with all follows this. It's basically it's a basic structure to it, right? If you just see it, right, you can just play it like it's basically like a song, you know. Like a universe is actually one song, universe, one song. That's it. That's what it is.
Right.
I like that, universe.
Yeah.
So I have a question. So say you purchase a metallic tincture or oil from yourself or any other alchemist. How would somebody go about testing? Is there a way in which, say, you get the oil of gold? How can I take this substance and analyze it? And, you know, how could I test its quality? Is there a way that, like, the layman such as myself could do so, or would it require special analytical equipment, or what are your thoughts on that?
So think about this, right? Okay. We break it down a little bit, right? So in the Alchemist says this. Okay, a soul will express itself in material form as an oil, right? Or an oily substance, right? Could be an oil that is an essential oil. It could be a fixed oil. So olive oil is a fixed oil. So an essential oil is a volatile oil that, you know, flies away if it stands by itself. Or you have a fixed oil that's more fixed into the earth, which is more a heavier oil, right? Say olive oil, whatever. And that's different parts of the soul. But the soul is always expressing itself in material form as an oily substance, right? You have the mind, which is represented by a spirit, right? So you have in spirit in the plant realm would be ethanol, right? But you have many different types of ethanol, right? Or in ethanol, but you have methanol, ethanol, and so on, like alcohols, different types of alcohol, right? And they're all, you could say in this, they're all different archetypes in one sense of mind, but mind is always infinite. Mind could be anything, right? You can imagine anything with your mind and it can exist because your mind is completely infinite. There's no boundaries to your mind whatsoever, right? So this universe is infinite. I mean, it is like literally infinite, right? There's no lack whatsoever. So your mind is always this, you know, kind of moldable substance, like in one sense, in material form, a spirit that is neutral and can take on a quality and become anything, in one sense. That's the mind, you know, I would say. Then you have the body, which is symbolized by the salts, you know. If you take a plant and you calcine it, then you can, you know, get out the minerals from the ash, which would be the salts or representation of the body, right? So you have the soul, mind, and body. We go back to the metallic oils. So the metallic oils are basically organic essences that are catalyzed by a metal, and the metal will, you know, basically rearrange matter so it becomes an oil, right? That's basically what it is. But those organic essences, those oils, right, are basically terpenes in one sense, or other kinds of oily substances, could be different molecules, right? And those substances are the same substances that you can find in plants, because the plants use metals and minerals to synthesize their own compounds. So everything is derived from metals and from minerals. Without metals and minerals, we would not exist. With nothing like plant life or animal life or human life could ever exist without the minerals and the metals, right? Because they are the ones who are, you know, basically catalyzing all the reactions and creating all the compounds that we can use and that we can use for our body to survive and thrive. So it means that a metallic oil that you say that you buy from a alchemist, right? So we take an example. We take an oil of gold, okay, for example. So there is an organic essence of gold. Could be many different types of compounds because there's many different ways of doing oil of gold. There's not only one way of doing oil of gold. There's many types of oil of gold depending on what path you take and how artistic you want to be, because it's always up to the alchemist of how he wants to do it, because there's infinite possibilities of doing things, right? And those means that those organic, essences can be tested and seen what compounds they are. Is the terpenes, sesquiterpenes, monoterpenes, whatever, all phenols, all this kind of stuff, right? And you can just test them. You can test what kind of compounds they are. If you can send them to a lab if you want to, and then you can see what is it, right? And then maybe those kind of say essential oils might be very similar to a plant compound. Like say that, for example, maybe the oil of gold is similar to a clove oil, for example, might be, for example. So you can see the similarities of it. But the main difference is this. Okay, think about this. You can have the same types of compounds found somewhere else in nature, not just in oil of gold. But the oil that is made from a plant has accumulated cosmic energy during its life as a plant or a tree, whatever, for a certain amount of time. So a plant might live a few years. A tree might live for a few thousand years. That it's accumulated all this cosmic energy, into itself. And then we consume that, right? And then we consume that cosmic energy in one sense, right? But imagine then the metals, right? Metals and minerals have been around for a very long time, say millions of years, billions of years, a very long time, which they accumulated all this energy, right? And then you synthesize an oil from the metal, and then you get that energy into yourself instead, which is way much more profound than making it from a plant.
Yeah, that's amazing to think about, because I think about over time, all the minerals that are in the earth and, everything that in the different layers, the plants are uptaking all of those minerals and then they're passing them on, because if we consume these plants, depending on where they were grown, what soil, sunlight, that they received, if it was a time when the sun was covered by, different things or pollutants in the air, I mean, all of those things, there's so much that can affect what you take in. And it's really just incredible.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, definitely. And it's like, and it's very profound also. Like this knowledge has been around for a very long time, like very, very long time. And we're just actually starting to rediscover it. It's actually becoming much more available as well. So it's like now this is the best time to be an alchemist. You can Google anything. If you want to have anything in knowledge, just Google it. Or like buy the book or whatever. So you can find all the knowledge is there. It's like, imagine, in the old days, right? The alchemists would kill themselves all the time because they would just make something and, oh no, I made an acid, poof, and then you die. It's like, that's like, now it's fine. You just Google it. You Google MSDS sulfuric acid. Oh, okay, now you know how to handle it. There you go.
Good point.
Yeah. So.
Can you talk a little bit more about the accumulations of cosmic energy and how the timing of things is important in the process and the relation to the different planetary bodies?
Right. So, okay, think about this. I'm going to quote a little bit of a thing that I mentioned to you before, Sky, about the law of one. Do you know about the law of one?
I've read a bit about it, but still not nearly as much as Sky.
So I was going to give a preface disclaimer for folks listening. This is a channeled work, so if you're sensitive to that kind of thing, this is a forewarning. I know many people for whom channeling can be kind of a trigger word for, or it's a devil. So many people just tune out and automatically dismiss any value in the ideas and concepts being conveyed. And to those people, then they go turn on Netflix and watch some sci-fi fantasy show and go tell their friends how amazing it is. To them, I just say relax. For me personally, I don't care one way or the other. I find all this stuff super interesting, and I love learning about it. Is the narrative authentic? I'll let you guys decide. So with that being said, Law of One material, let's get into it. What is the Law of One? Where does it come from?
So basically, this ties into a little bit, what we were talking about, just, to make a little like a better context to things, right? So, I mean, I try to see that I try not to just take anything at face value, like at all, right? And try to always see, between the lines, what is actually conveyed. Because every single system that you see, doesn't matter if it's astrology or if it's human design or if it's Law of One, alchemy, all these things that that you read about, all these things are basically just concepts and systems that are pointing, in a direction on something in the universe, right? And this is it's a pointing, it's a finger pointing. It's not actually the truth itself. So don't take it at face value. Just see that look, it's pointing in a direction where you can look, and then you can decide for yourself, and then you can actually try to see, does this resonate with me or not, right? Is this a good system or a good way of seeing things or not? Take it or leave it, or just take on the glasses, put them on, and enjoy the show. It doesn't really matter, right? So, but with that said, right, if you look at the greater universe, if you look at there's basically they're there must be a structure to the universe in one sense. Otherwise, we won't see it. We wouldn't see this intricacy of living organisms with all these, complexity, all this kind of stuff. And this, structure might be very basic, in one sense, but it's all, what we see. We see it everywhere, right? And then you have this structure that, it has to play out itself in a certain way, right? And then you can see that, okay, you can see in astrology, you have the planetary bodies, right? And then you have these, you have the galaxy that is spinning, and all this kind of stuff, right? And all these things are basically affecting, what's happening, in the solar system, in the galaxy, in the universe, and so on, right? So if you go back to the law of one, right? So the law of one was this channeled works by Don Elkins, Colin Ruckert, and I can't remember, it was 3 persons, right? Were channeling, and they were channeling a collective consciousness called the Ra, right? And the Ra is actually basically the Egyptian god of Ra in one sense. And they would say it's the same in one sense. Okay, so these 3 people, right? Which I think 2 of them are dead now, I think so, if I'm not mistaken. 1 is living still. They channeled these works throughout sessions in about 2 or 3 years in the 1980s. And these are free, online if you want to use them. I had downloaded the audiobook actually a while ago, which I really liked. And it's basically a PhD dissertation in metaphysics. And it goes through all these things of how the universe is structured in one sense, according to them, right? So take it, for the face value over this, that it's according to them. So what they are saying, okay, you have this universe, there's one sun, right? Which was created, and in the beginning you have these, densities that life and creation move forward. It's like how consciousness evolves, right, through creation, and then goes back to the creator. So you first have this thing called the Logos, which is born out of the universe, and the Logos is the first primal sun, and this Logos, right, was basically the archetypical mind of the universe, how it's structured. And then when you have this archetypical mind, it starts to, evolve. So it, creates, fractals of itself in one sense. And then you have, say that you have the first primal sun, first primal Logos, and then there comes another sun, that is, a fractal of that, that is the involvement of that. And then, in infinity, because we can see it's very infinite, and every other sun, which is a Logos in this sense, as they say, which basically makes a refinement to the first archetypal mind and structures its solar system or its kind of little sphere of planets in a certain way to be able to create a certain structure of how life is experienced or how consciousness and things are experiencing and evolving, right? So that means that our sun is a sub-logos of the first primal Logos, and our Earth is a sub-logos, and we are a sub-logos of that primal archetypical mind, right? So it means that our solar system is, basically created in a certain structure for us to basically experience, life in a certain way, right? Imagine like that's a game, right? You experience the game with certain rules of how things are structured. But then you see that, that the law of one says that there's 7 densities of life, right? 7 stages of evolution. The first stage is just awareness, right? Just being like, say, rocks and fire and earth and wind and water basically colliding, it's all basically high entropy, and it's like a lot of chaos going on because everything is colliding each other. And that, might be for a few billion years, right? As we see also, with science. And then that's basically just awareness. Consciousness is basically aware of itself, just, moving around. And then second density, starts to begin where, you have this microbial life and so on, starts to, you have movement. And then you have things colliding in each other and you have movement going on. And then you have a rudimentary kind of life from the bacteria, and then you have plant life, and then you have animal life and so on. And this might also go on for a few billion years or so on. And that's the first 2 densities of existence of the universe. And then we have the third density where we're currently at, right? and the third density is a very short density in this solar system as this. And this is evolved around this separation, where we basically see, okay, I am separate from you. I can see that I'm separate, and then you have this thing like, okay, you feel separate from the universe in one sense, instead of being integrated with the universe. And then you have this ego thing going on, and then you have to also make a choice. So the law of one is basically going through this choice of, hey, you have to either you have to do the choice of being service to others or service to self. That's what they're saying. And then you can move on, depending on what choice you make and how you graduate onto the next level, because always it's an involvement, and it's always different stages and different and so on. And then you go to the fourth density, which is more love and understanding. And then you have the fifth density, which is wisdom. And you have the sixth density, which is unity. And then you go back into the creator. So in this density we are now, we have this basically, we have a lot of, a lot of suffering, a lot of catalysts, a lot of things going on for us to be able to make this authentic choice, to be able to move in more into love, for example. And then if you look at, say, Ra is then a highly evolved social memory complex that is basically millions of souls have come together and to form a gigantic kind of like a memory complex where they all share everything and becomes much more highly evolved, and they might be in, say, sixth density and so on, and then they share knowledge back to us through the channeling works of these three people, right? That's basically what the law of one is. Then they go through all these things.
So are these? It's funny. It kind of reminds me of, like, in Genesis, it says in the beginning was the word. It's like the original vibration, or the Om, in which all stems from. Kind of, God created the heavens and earth, and this is kind of like the expanded metaphysics of that notion. It seems.
You're talking about in Christian ideology, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
because it says God was lonely, and that was the need for creating man and woman. And even Adam, he says that he created Adam from the earth, and then from Adam he took his rib and created Eve. So you can look at religious backgrounds and see these same things, and then even biblically it talks about the man and the wife becoming one. So I think these concepts are repeated, in different religions and faith. So whether or not someone, subscribes to a particular religion, I think that they can still get value from this and see, the different concepts play out very much so.
And so are these densities tied to, like, the astrological ages? I've heard it said that we're entering into the age of Aquarius. Does that kind of tie in with this as well, or?
It does, yes. I mean, think about this. It's like imagine yourself. Imagine, if you ever seen the galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, it's a spiral, right? It's a spiral galaxy, right? And we are basically on the edges of one of the outer rings of the spiral, right? So we are very far out. Our solar system is very far out from the galactic center, right? That means that where we are at the moment, right? When we basically the galaxy is spinning and we're spinning with it. Our solar system is actually moving around, the galactic center, right? And this, galactic year, which would be one, rotation, back into the same point, that would be one eon or one cycle, right? Which is 25,600 years, right? And this correlates to that. You say that a cycle in third density is 25,600 years. And that means that a master cycle, which we are basically ending right now, is 75,000 years. There's three cycles around the galactic center, right? So we are basically, in the end of the great master cycle of the third density, where everything happens. Basically, this is the time where everything happens. And where you want to be here, for sure. And maybe that's why we are here in one sense, maybe, but it's like, this is all these things happening. And then basically that's why we just went from age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. We just moved into this. And what you can see is that this has actually been confirmed. You can see this in science, is that you see that basically it's like a galactic weather, right? So when you move into this part of space with this age of Aquarius, is a much more higher energetic space that we're moving into, right? So all of the whole solar system is affected of this change because it's basically in a different space of space, if that makes sense.
So
it means, right?
Oh, sorry. So is the idea that kind of like the place that we were coming into is kind of allowing us to receive different sort of cosmic energies that maybe are like influencing our DNA or consciousness on some level? Is that the idea?
Yes, very much so, very much so. And, you know, in one sense, you can see this in our reality. It's like things are really starting to heat up in the planet, you know, because things are literally heating up from the inside. So imagine this, because we're in a higher energetic, you know, space of the universe or of the, you know, the galaxy, every single planet in this solar system is heating up from inside. So if you look at climate change, right, all these cycles, because we have cycles on cycles and cycles, this is a natural cycle that is happening, you know, every, 25,600 years, so when all these cycles, right? So every single planet, Mars, Jupiter, all these planets is heating up from inside. And you can see this if you look at NASA, like say NASA data, you can see that this is happening for sure. It's not, like, a pseudoscience whatsoever. It's actually real science that you see that's happening, right? And this is to a very big account of what's going on with our climate, because it's, our physical Earth is changing, and we are changing with it, as you said, with our DNA is changing, our consciousness is changing, and we are actually being allowed much more information through our bodies, and our, like a whole being is basically bombarded with all this energy, right? And it's changing us fundamentally.
Well, I think, there's something to be said too with heat. Heat is energy. And even from a scientific viewpoint, if you want to create more energy, you create, an atmosphere where the atoms speed up and they move, and movement creates heat. And so, that makes sense. I mean, if right now one of the results is that, we're experiencing a time where heat is an issue. Unfortunately, people tend to see heat as unfavorable when it comes to weather, but for other processes, it's really valuable and important. And that you remind me, when you talk about this, you're talking on a much larger scale. Something I learned recently, when we were studying plants, that just relates to this in a really small scale way, as far as the effect of the atmosphere on plants and humans and how things happen. We had purchased vanilla pods, and for the first time, I learned about the waxing and waning moon, and that literally you have to plant these plants during a specific phase of the moon. Otherwise, you can take the plant and you can bend it. And I can't remember, do you, Sky, if it was the waxing or waning when it snaps?
I'm not sure which one it was, but yeah, I do remember.
I can't recall, and maybe because you you do this a lot more. We're starting to grow our first vanilla pods, so we haven't planted them yet in the soil. But during the certain time, if you plant them at the wrong time, the plants will actually snap. And then even when you are taking the vines and redirecting them to grow up the tree, because you have to plant them next to a cacao tree or other type of tree so that they can grow on the tree to produce the vanilla pods. If you happen to move the vine and set it on the tree at the wrong time, it will snap and kill the vine. And with the vanilla bean, it only produces a flower one time out of the year, and it has to be pollinated within 24 hours. I found that amazing. So, I mean, that's a really small scale, but that's just how important the environment is, and the things that are going on affect, something so significant. So imagine how much more so with humans. So,
I mean, this is also very, compelling evidence that everything is connected, for sure.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah.
So do you see this time as like some sort of stage of like calcination, to use like an alchemical term? Like, I know there's like the idea of the harvest within the law of one. Maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit and what that has to do with.
Sure. So, I mean, what they say, they call it the harvest, but the harvest is basically at the point that because Carla Rucker, who was the so-called instrument in this channeling, she had that terminology because she was very Christian in one sense in her background. So, you can do it. I would say more like a graduation, I think would be a better way to, because harvest sounds a little bit weird in one sense, but maybe you can use that terminology if you want to. But I would say basically a graduation. So I would say this, like, because we're ending a master cycle, of this, we are going through the fire, as you said, this calcination thing, we are going through the fire, and we are, basically purging out the last remnants of our, dark sides. We have to basically, basically face our own darkness, and also the darkness of humanity, because there's a lot of darkness in humanity and corruption in humanity that we have to face as a collective, and we have to move forward and through it, like through the fire. We are forged through the fire, and then we can come out on the other side and actually, be enveloped in the light, in one sense. So the harvest, in one sense, is saying that, okay, after a certain point, the sun will, erupt in a massive solar flash, and when this happens, everything on life would be affected of this, and then it would be a form of graduation where you either move up into the next density, so to speak, or you have to repeat the third density again, and one more master cycle. So either you learn the lessons of this density, which is basically either choose to be service to self or service to others, preferably service to others, preferably than service to self. And if you do that, right, and you become more service to others than service to yourself, then you can graduate onto the next level, right? That's so to speak. But it can also be a much more of a metaphor, right? So maybe we have no idea how this is going to play out. But I would say that we see a lot of changes happen around us, and we have to change, right? We cannot live in the old way of thinking. We cannot live by destroying the planet, or all this kind of stuff that we're doing there, or destroying ourselves. There's so many. We are living so unharmoniously with things around us and with ourselves, so that things has to change. There's no other way. And we just have to wait and see. We have no idea what's going to happen. But I think that there will be a great energetic shift going on. If it's going to be in 5 years or 10 years or 30 years or 100 years, who knows? Very hard to say. What do you think? That there's something changing, fundamentally, I would say.
Yeah, and so with like the astrological influences, over materials and ourselves, like in terms of the alchemical work, there's tropical astrology and then there's sidereal astrology that some practice. And would entering into this new kind of density, would that create a different dynamic in terms of how it would affect the process of creating something like an alchemical spagyric? Or, what are your thoughts on that?
That's actually a very good question, actually. I like that. Yes, that would definitely change things, and you can see that, alignments are not the same as they used to be, right? If you look at, make an example, look at the pyramids of Giza. They were aligned, when they were created, they were aligned in a very specific way to correlate with the stars and the planets going on, right? And some say that it was a stargate. Some say that it was an energy device and all this kind of stuff, or maybe it was a sensory deprivation chamber or things like that. But that means that when they were built and they were aligned in a proper way, they could utilize the energies of the cosmos coming down at that specific point, right? That they were, aligned to. And now they are out of alignment with that, right? So we cannot use that for the same way as we used to, right? So it means that alignments are always changing, right? And things are changing in the universe, and we are changing, and then so on and so on. And that means that for us to be able to see what's going on, we cannot be stuck in old dogmas. We cannot be stuck in old ways of thinking. we actually have to tune in to what's going on around us. We have to actually be spiritually aware of what's going around us, so we can, follow our inner guidance and see what's going on, right? And it's like, for example, for you guys, you want to plant these seeds and all this kind of stuff, right? So you have to observe what's going on and see in, your reality what you have to do to be able to get, the outcome that you want. And you cannot always read that. You cannot, take anybody's word for it. You have to see for yourself and listen and look of what's going on around you, and be very, very attentive and very, hone your skills of, listening to nature, right? And listening to the cosmos, listening what's going on. And that's basically a very inner knowledge that you cannot basically, read to. You have to, feel it into yourself. And then also in that sense, you go back to, then you have to purify yourself. If you purify yourself, you can be much more receptive to all these things that are actually going on in the universe. If you're very, heavy and you have, just eating junk food and all this kind of stuff, you cannot tune into all these frequencies. It's impossible. You have to purify yourself to be able to do this.
Yeah, it's interesting. So what are some of the best examples that you have experienced where you feel you have really got it right or created a product that was very potent in terms of harnessing the energies of the planetary influences that has personally given you validation of these concepts?
I mean, I would say one of my favorite, I go back to this, the Amanita muscaria, for sure. And basically it's like, think about this, like every time if I will go out and harvest something, right, I try to actually eat that I want to harvest. So if I say like I want to harvest mushrooms, I just eat the tiny bit of the mushrooms and then I go out and harvest, right? Then I can communicate with the mushroom because I have make an intention, I want to harvest, right? And then when I do that, all of a sudden you just poof, everything just appears for you, right? It's just like there's mushrooms everywhere. You're like, holy shit, I had no idea there was so much mushrooms here. I had no idea. And you're just like walking around and just picking up mushrooms everywhere, right? Because you make an intention and then you just communicate and you eat that, and you do that. And I think you can do that with everything, right? It doesn't really matter what you want to harvest, what you want to do. But that's been one of my profound things that I see. That like, as long as I do it with intention and I try to communicate with whatever I want to, or work with, it works very well. It always works very well. And that's the perfect example with Amanita, because that's, every time now, because I've been really fascinated with it, I just, like, every year I just find more and more and more mushrooms, and they just keep appearing everywhere. And it's like I'm like, holy shit, it's like, it never ends, It's like, what's going on, And it's basically, it just gives it you. You're like, okay, here you go. Whatever, bounty of harvest, So that's actually quite funny.
That is funny. Is there something to do with the Merkaba in the Law of One? The Merkaba?
That's a good question. I can't remember if what was with the Merkaba. Merkaba is the
divine light vehicle. And then I was wondering, maybe you could elaborate a little bit on, for people you mentioned like the chakra system, kind of give people a rundown on what exactly that is and what.
So chakra system, I actually like the human design chakra system because they say that we are more evolved now, so that we have 9 centers instead of 7. And then the basic chakra centers is that you have the root, you have the sacral, you have the solar plexus, you have the heart, you have the throat, you have the third eye, and then you have the crown chakra, right? Human design says that you have 9 instead of 7 and so on. But this is basically, they are energy vortexes that, basically are spinning, right? And you can see them there. We might have many more different chakras. You can put it in many different ways. But the chakra system is basically just like, you can see these basic, like, archetypical how these things are structured. Okay, the base is basically the first chakra that we have is basically the like patience, security, all this kind of stuff going on, right? And if you can have a free flowing, like, a chakra system, or you can have stagnant, or you can have blockages in different energy vortexes that you have, right? And then they can manifest in different ways. Like, if you have say that you guys say that you have a trauma, and then this, then you can have a blockage in one of these chakras, and then you might have to work on that. You can work with herbs, or you can work with psychology or whatever, right, to be able to alleviate that particular stagnation or trauma. So, but the chakra system itself, right, you can see that, that it works very well with, the correspondence. Like, for example, you can see correspondence with planets, with metals, with herbs, and so on. And depending of, what kind of methodology you want to use, you can basically pinpoint different chakras to basically, okay, I want to pinpoint this this ailment, or this, as I said, trauma, or this, kind of pattern, whatever, right? And you can use it very effectively if you know what you're doing, right? That's my point of view of it.
I'm curious, what are some book recommendations that you would recommend for the listeners to kind of get more insight into these different subjects that we've covered, or just any books that you find interesting, or any philosophers that you find interesting?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I like, the classical alchemical books. I like Robert Alan Bartlett. He makes some really good books, like Real Alchemy and Way of the Crucible. Two very good books if you want to really get into alchemy. I like the Human Design is one way I really like as well. That's a really good book, the Definite Edition. There's one other thing I'm starting to get into more now. It's called Gene Keys. I'm not sure if you heard about that. That's also very interesting.
I was actually going to ask you. That was one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because you had mentioned that when we were talking before.
So Gene Keys, I haven't actually diving so deep into it, but Gene Keys was made from a guy who was actually studying human design, and then he went into doing his own thing. And Gene Keys is more based on I Ching. So basically, if you guys who don't know human design was made from a guy called Ra Uhuruhu, and he basically compiled these different types of systems. So he took basically Western and Eastern astrology, also a lot of Vedic, like the scriptures and so on. He took I Ching, and then he took Kabbalah, which is the the tree of life and so on. And he combined this into one system that is virtually much more updated. I like the system very much. It's just one way of interpreting these things, right? Some people like more astrology. Some people like more the Bhagavad Gita, the Vedic stuff. But for me, human design is really nice because it's very easy to comprehend in one sense. It's very spot on in my sense. But then, Gene Keys is basically an offshoot of human design in one sense, and is based more on I Ching, which is basically the 64 codons, the 64 strings of the DNA, and so on and so on. And that's more basically, you have to, they say that you have these patterns of different gene keys that you can unlock, right? And if you read about them and then contemplate them, then you can lock up these basically higher states in yourself. But then you have to basically go through your shadow first to be able to lock up your higher state. So you have your shadow side, and you can contemplate that and see, okay, what is this shadow side? How does this relate to my reality and to myself, and so on and so on. And if you basically balance that, then go through that, then you can unlock your CD, which is the higher state of yourself, right? And then you can have all these 64 higher states of consciousness that you can lock up and basically evolve through, I would say.
And so you mentioned the shadow. Is that like Carl Jung's idea of the shadow self? And can you explain a little bit for people what that means?
So basically, we have all shadow sides and we have all light sides, right? So there's nothing. If you look at all these things that are all these perspectives, like there's no right or wrong anywhere, right? It's just basically a matter of what you want to choose, right? So the universe does not say, okay, if you want to choose the dark side, per se, it's wrong. There's nothing wrong with it. You can choose whatever dark side you want, because there's a lot of value in one sense of going through the your dark side. But if you go through your dark side and you choose that and you want to be there and don't transmute that, then it becomes destructive for you, right? But if you transmute your shadow, you will be able to access your higher state, which is more light, love, this kind of stuff, in one sense. But so it's just different sides of the universe depending on what you want to learn. But of course, most people wants to be happy and be balanced and have all this kind of light and love and all this kind of stuff, right? But you basically, to be able to get there and to, to understand, the contrast and all this kind of stuff, you have to be able to go through your shadow and accept your shadow and see, okay, look, my shadow is as much as me as my light side. I have to balance both of them to be able to see everything from all different vantage points, and then I can basically make an authentic choice of what I want and what I don't want, basically. That's what I would say.
So say like somebody has a proclivity to anger or something, yeah. Would that be something that would kind of be representative of their shadow selves, and then them kind of drawing attention or awareness to that, but making the choice not to respond in a certain way? Is that kind of how you would work through that, or? Maybe,
yeah. That's one aspect. Anger can also be basically just a symptom of something else, right? So anger could be much more along the way. So basically, anger could be something that's triggered because you are suppressing something, or anger might be just a way of your design, right? In human design, you say that, okay, manifestors, if they're not aligned with themselves in human design, they experience anger, and that's basically just a sign of them that they have to realign, with something in themselves. I'm a projector in human design. I feel bitterness. I don't feel so much anger, but maybe, of course, there is anger as well. But anger is usually basically something suppressed that you don't want to do, and then you project it outward instead of going inward. For example, maybe you have a side of yourself that you are traumatized as a kid, and then instead of feeling that trauma and that maybe rejection or whatever it is, then you project out that onto the reality as anger. Could be, for example.
That's very interesting. Well, before we wrap it up, Ashley, do you have any other questions? I think her volume's off. I'll wait for her. I'll give her a second. We can't hear you.
About now.
Oh, yep, there we go.
Okay, I had to unplug the mic. I don't know what happened.
Yeah. It's
oh my God. No, he covered so much. For me, this is all fairly new to me, and I'm always hungry to learn new things, because it just, in my life, like, it's a never-ending learning process. So, no, I'm really impressed. So I can't think of any other questions right now, but I would love to have him back on down the road for sure.
Absolutely. Well, this is awesome. Any last notes or anything you want to leave the audience with? Where can they find you? Where can they find your products, or any of that?
So basically, I'm actually starting to, I'm going to make some more of my work more available. It hasn't been so much available, to be honest, because I've been doing a lot of work for, as I said, more consulting work, and doing much more, doing a lot of white label and working for other people. But I'm developing a lot of, say, metallic oils are coming as well, and a lot of mineral stuff and so on. So there's going to be further down the road much more going on. In different forms, so I want to make it more available. I'll keep you updated on that, exactly how that's going to begin. So Melissa's is one of just a small thing there. There's not so much there, but if people want to contact me, it's more going to my Instagram. I like you guys. You can contact me there. I'm going to actually start posting much more now, because I just got a kid 10 months ago, so it's been a lot with the family and so on, taking a lot of time, which is quite nice. But yeah, so Mait Alchemy is my Instagram. You can find me there. And if you have anything, I always, I want to help, and I always want to share my work, and and so on. You can also buy products from me, but I don't have a window at the moment. But there is going to come more for sure.
Beautiful. Well, thank you again. I greatly appreciate it. So this is awesome talk.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
I feel like you explained everything in so many different ways to really reach out to different people, because different people, they think differently with their minds. And so just visually, scientifically, getting into the alchemy is very well done.
Thanks for having me.
The future is a concept. It doesn't exist. As the proverb says, tomorrow never comes. There is no such thing as tomorrow. There never will be, because time is always now.
Welcome to the Philosophical Minds Podcast, the podcast about the stuff we wonder about.
and other things.
Today we are here with Warren G, aka Warren the Wizard, CEO of Evolved Alchemy, of which encompasses a variety of hubs such as Superior Supplements, One Herbs, Stem Fusions, Evolved Hemp, and Harmony Extraction Systems.